In animation, sometimes cartoonists would create their own series, and if it turns out to be a success, to the point where they may work on it for a few years until they end the series eventually and will go on to create another series. But if not successful, to the point where they may not. Unfortunately, however, not all of them are lucky though. And sometimes, some of them that has never been a cartoonist and created their own series before, that have once, way before then, worked on something else. This happened to one guy who once upon a time was a screenwriter and would eventually, in the mid-2000s, he created only one animated TV series. This guy would be none other than a man by the name of Dave Polsky. I'm sure that a lot of people don't even know who Dave Polsky is, and the ones that do know who he is probably know him more for working as a writer on My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. What they don't know about him is that they didn't know that he only created one show that is...
the show that I created a show on Disney Channel called The Buzz on Maggie.
His show came out in 2005 on Disney Channel, and it was called The Buzz on Maggie. And I'm sure when a lot of people tune into his show, they watched through the opening of the show, and by the time they got to the end of the opening, they looked down at the bottom of the TV screen and they said, created by Dave Polsky. Well, who is Dave Polsky? Who is that guy? Was he a cartoonist? Was he an animator who got his start in the animation industry? No, he was a television writer, and then he would create his show for children of all ages to enjoy. I mean, he really created the show for everybody to enjoy. I think when people tuned in to watch his show when it first came out, they were just mind-blown at what they just watched, and his show did well and it received positive reviews. But not everybody liked his show, and it is a dark, tragic story about how his show got treated by the network and by a lot of people. It got to a point where the kids were not watching the show. A lot of people hate his show. It was hated so much is that it ended up on the worst cartoons of all time list, and that is a tragedy that this had to end like this, because when it did, he never created another show ever again after this one. His show became very forgotten about after it ended on a short run, and as the years go by, it would eventually gain a cult following. But the story of Dave Polsky is more than just that. He took challenges. It took him a long time before he would become a writer and before he would create his show about a twin girl fly named Maggie who just wants to have fun. How did he create this underrated classic?
It's Liz Showtime.
David Charles Polsky was born in 1964 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was the oldest child raised by a working-class family. His father, Stanley, was a professional engineer. He was a senior design engineer and management consultant at U.S. Steel. He founded EPMOD Consultants to support effective communications across organizational boundaries. And his mother, Anna, was an accomplished teacher. She was also a dancer. She danced ballet that she loved ever since she was a kid. She was born in Camagüey, Cuba. Her mother died when she was 10 months old, so she was raised by her paternal grandmother. At the age of 20, she was a working teaching professional, riding alone on horseback through rural Cuba to single-handedly establish. She served as a teacher at a one-room schoolhouse for rural families. On a summer trip to Miami in 1958, she met Stanley when she went to go see her sister. Stanley was an American from Philadelphia. He was born in New York. He came from a Jewish immigrant family. He moved to Philadelphia. When he met Anna, he wanted to marry her. When she went back to Cuba, Stanley would call her and would write to her. He came to Cuba by Christmas 1958. But by that time, Cuba was still going through the revolution that had started since 1953. On New Year's Day 1959, Cuban Revolution had ended. Stanley left on the last plane for the United States. By the time Eder met his family, it was not good. His family had a lot of resentment towards her because she was not Jewish. She was Cuban. At first they rejected her. She was not invited to her brother-in-law's wedding. Not long after that, she won the Polskys over and they formally apologized to her. Their engagement had spanned the epic backdrop of the Cuban Revolution, and they got married in 1959. When Anna went to go visit her family in Cuba in 1962, she and her husband Stanley had to endure the fear that they might never see each other again. By the time Anna visited her family in Cuba, the missile crisis had already started.
The United States' answer to what Adlai Stevenson termed Soviet blackmail in Cuba was a quarantine of all offensive weapons being shipped from Russia to that island fortress. The U.S. threw up a steel fence, prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials of war. In Cuba itself, 100,000 men were put under emergency orders as they had been during past invasion scares. The waterfront in Havana and along other parts of the coast bristled with gun emplacements as the Cuban regime waited to see what their bosses in the Kremlin were to do. Cuba became the focus of world attention. Here centered the most critical threat of global war since the surrender of Germany 17 years ago. Castro has put every able-bodied man through military training. He has even armed some as young as 12 years of age, and authorities assembled thousands in cities and villages for patriotic rallies. As in the past, these rallies are designed to whip up hate of what Castro calls Yankee imperialistic warmongers. To suggestions that a UN team inspect missile sites, Castro said that they had better come ready for combat. He went on to call President Kennedy a pirate for setting up the quarantine.
That was terrible. I was grounded there. I had to buy a ticket back. In order for people to leave, they needed someone in the United States to send dollars to buy the tickets. That was a long process because there were so many people wanted, to get leave. There was no plane leaving Cuba at the time for the United States. My brother had someone, and then I was able to take the first plane that left Cuba. I went to Mexico, stay in the airport, and then from Mexico, I went to the United States. And it was a period of about 4 months.
After that, she and her husband Stanley moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She got her citizenship, she converted to Judaism, she became a teacher, and she raised her first son, David. She raised 2 more of her sons, Daniel and Kenneth, Dave Polsky's 2 younger brothers. His brother Daniel, yes, that Daniel, who is the 40th Bloomsburg Distinguished Professor of Health Policy and Economics at Johns Hopkins University. His other brother Kenneth, the youngest, is a problem solver. Dave Polsky grew up in Pittsburgh at an early age. When Dave Polsky was a kid, when he was in 2nd grade, he wrote a story called Back in History, and he entered into the contest and he won 2nd place in the state of Pennsylvania.
I was in 2nd grade, and I wrote a story called Back in History, where I visited, my dad was a civil engineer, but I thought that meant he worked in a steel factory. So I imagined that I was visiting him at work and a wrench fell on my head, and then I went back in time to when George Washington was becoming president and blah, 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 and I actually can't remember the whole story. But I remember with these pages, and I kind of stapled them into like a binding and then entered them in a contest and won second place in the state of Pennsylvania for the story.
Dave Polsky's childhood is unknown at this point, except the one he wrote a story, but I think his childhood was kind of interesting because growing up in Pittsburgh, getting to experience everything that's happened there, so I think his childhood was kind of interesting. Plus, he lived with his family. That was until something happened. His parents' marriage was declining. In 1979, when Dave Polsky was 15 years old, his parents, Anna and Stanley Polsky, got separated, which ultimately led to divorce. And in 1981, 2 years after they got divorced, Stanley Polsky founded this company. And so it was called Unstructured Nothingness. And that's the company that he founded after he got divorced. Dave Polsky went to Mount Lebanon High School. He became a stage actor. He did a lot of theaters, and he even put on his own plays. A newspaper article from the Pittsburgh Press on March 26, 1981 shows a picture of 16-year-old Dave Polsky and his team. There are photographs of his plays that can be seen in Mount Lebanon High School's 1981 to 1982 yearbooks. He did all the shows. He did the holiday shows, one in 1981 and the other in 1982. And he was in Charlie's Aunt. He was a stage actor at the auditorium at high school. He was in Sweeney Todd, and he played the main character, Sweeney Todd, who is an 1890s villain. And there's a newspaper article about that. And he did that until he left high school in 1982. When he left high school, Polsky moved to Philadelphia to attend college at the University of Pennsylvania. Just like what he did in high school, he did a lot of theaters. He got involved with comedy, so he did a lot of theater comedies. He was also a math major. He did the mathematics, and he also did philosophy of science. After he graduated from college, he moved out of Philadelphia and moved to New York to pursue his career. He got a job working in Wall Street as an investment banking for a while. After that, he got a job as a social worker, but that didn't last long. He met Sharon Flagelman, and they got married. They moved down to Portland, Maine, and gave birth to their first son, Gabriel, in 1993. By 1995, Dave Polsky would get his big break.